Hello and welcome to another Cliff Reviews Art House. This time I'm reviewing The Stimming Pool, directed by Eastwood and the Neurocultures collective. This is a curious film. I had to go through a process in order to be certain that I was judging it fairly and correctly. I knew this film was about autism but didn't know much more than that. On first viewing, I found it deeply difficult to connect with. It's abstract, almost entirely without narrative, and it feels at first glance like a collection of random clips punctuated by strange moments of performance art. There's no plot, no characters in any conventional sense, and very little to grasp onto. Visually too, I didn't find it captivating. Perhaps one or two shots. There was one shot of some tree roots which did stand out, but on the whole, I found little aesthetic interest here to hold me. I was a bit disappointed. I found out that I'm autistic relatively late in life, so I was interested in what I might learn about autism. But there's little to learn about autism here, at least in an explicit sense. The film is co-directed by 5 autistic artists working alongside filmmaker Eastwood. He's perhaps best known for his 2017 documentary Island. I found Island a deeply moving and poetic work about people nearing the end of their life. It's profoundly human and surprisingly beautiful. Eastwood found a kind of poetry in a situation that many people would assume is beyond beauty. Just off that one film, I trust this filmmaker, so I thought I'd better dig a bit deeper before being too critical of The Stimming Pool. I watched an interview with Eastwood and Kumari Bradburn, one of the 5 co-directors, and I also found a document called The Autistic Camera Manifesto prepared by Kumari Bradburn. What the film's trying to do then became a little bit clearer. I understood that it's not just there to represent autism, but to express it through the camera itself. The camera becomes a character embodying autistic perception, things like stimming, masking, melting down, etc. So I watched the film again, and yes, knowing the intention definitely helped. I began to notice what the film was doing with movement, framing and sound. But even then, I'm not sure it fully worked. I'm not sure that it's actually possible to detect any of this if you haven't read the manifesto. If the film is meant to communicate autistic experience directly without translation, then shouldn't it do so without having to read the manifesto? That said, I deeply respect the ambition. It's a bold and courageous work. The film rejects all conventions, narrative, structure, exposition, even aesthetic continuity. It's radical and purposely so. It lets go of control, and it seems clear that Eastwood didn't lead in the traditional sense. This isn't his film in the way Island was. It's a genuine collaboration in the truest sense, and perhaps the fact that it's less polished, less accessible, is a sign of that. The most interesting part for me was the scene where the co-directors sit around a table and discuss the project. I found myself wanting more of this, not explanation exactly, but context. A bit more insight into the minds behind the work might have offered a bit more of an entry point. But I can also see how that could have compromised the project. To explain the art in any way could be to revert to a neurotypical mode of understanding, and this film is trying very deliberately to resist that. This work is conceptual art with a purpose, political, poetic, and above all radical. It reframes authorship, questions cinematic norms, and refuses the idea that neurotypical perception is the default gaze. But I won't pretend that I found it satisfying. It feels in many ways more like a workshop process than a finished piece. The value may lie more in the making than in the final output, and that's fine, perhaps even important. But it also raises the question, should conceptual process-based art be held to the same standards of coherence, clarity and effect as other forms? Or should we judge it just on its own terms? Don't get me wrong, I'm not against conceptual art, even if it's obscure. I'm an artist and my work is primarily conceptual. But for me, there always has to be some way in. And even after 2 viewings, the Stimming Pool never really offered me that way in. I want to like this film as I genuinely admire its boldness, and I appreciate what Eastwood has facilitated here. I really respect its intentions, even if I found the execution somewhat alienating. And maybe that's the point. Perhaps it's not meant to be comfortable or easy. Perhaps it's meant to disrupt the way we watch and the way we define what counts as cinema. It reminded me in a way of Jean-Luc Godard. I've been revisiting his work lately for a series of reviews that I'm going to do. Like the Stimming Pool, much of Godard's output is radical, anti-conventional and often inaccessible. These aren't films you enjoy. They're anarchy, they're punk rock, they're confrontational, refusing to give you what you want, but also refusing to let you look away. And maybe that's where the Stimming Pool succeeds, not as entertainment, but as disruption, as a piece of radical, autistic cinema. It doesn't explain itself, it doesn't accommodate you, it simply is. And in that refusal, there is something deeply honest, even if it's hard to love. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.